Sophie Cunningham was ecstatic. She had just signed with the Indiana Fever. This was a fresh start, a new opportunity. This was her chance to prove herself. She knew what people were saying about the Fever. Cheryl Swoops, a WNBA legend, had even said they weren't built to win now. Sophie was determined to prove her wrong. Sophie believed in this team. She saw the potential. Indiana had a young, hungry core. They were ready to compete, and Sophie, with her experience and determination, was ready to lead them. She knew the Fever were missing a spark. They needed someone to ignite their fire. Sophie was ready to be that spark. Cheryl Swoops could have her doubts. Sophie had heard it all before, but she wasn't fazed. She knew the truth. The Fever were on the cusp of something special. They had all the pieces, a dynamic point guard, a powerful front court, and now, with Sophie on board, they had the missing link. Sophie was ready to silence the critics. She was ready to show the world what the Indiana Fever were truly capable of. This was a new chapter, not just for Sophie, but for the entire franchise, and Sophie Cunningham was ready to write her own story. Sophie Cunningham didn't just want to make the playoffs, she didn't just want to win a few games. Sophie Cunningham came to Indiana with one goal in mind: to win a championship. She had that championship mentality. It was ingrained in her. It was in her DNA. She had won at every level: high school, college. Now she was determined to do the same in the WNBA. Sophie saw the talent surrounding her in Indiana. She knew this team had the potential to be special. They had the pieces. They just needed someone to bring it all together. Sophie was ready to be that leader. She was ready to push her teammates to be their best. She knew what it took to win. She had experienced it firsthand, and she was going to do everything in her power to instill that same winning culture in Indiana. The Fever were young, they were hungry, and now, with Sophie's championship pedigree, they had the belief. Sophie Cunningham didn't just bring her talent to Indiana, she brought her winning mindset, and that, more than anything, could be the key to bringing a championship to the Fever. Coming to Indiana wasn't just about basketball for Sophie Cunningham, it was personal. It was a homecoming. Sophie was born and raised in the Midwest. She understood the values, the work ethic, and the passion. Indiana felt like home. The fans were passionate. They loved their basketball, and Sophie was determined to give them something to cheer about. She wanted to connect with the community, to be a role model for young girls, to show them that anything is possible. Sophie's family was a huge part of her journey. They were her rock, her biggest supporters, and they were thrilled to have her playing closer to home. Her parents rarely missed a game. Her siblings were always there to cheer her on. Playing in Indiana meant the world to Sophie. It meant her family could be a bigger part of her journey. It meant representing the Midwest, a place that held a special place in her heart. This wasn't just a basketball decision, it was a homecoming. Sophie Cunningham knew that talent alone wouldn't win championships. It took more than that. It took chemistry. It took hard work. It took a shared belief in something bigger than yourself. And that's what Sophie was determined to build in Indiana. From day one, Sophie bought into the Fever's vision. She embraced the city. She embraced her teammates. She embraced the grind. Sophie was all about building a winning culture, a culture of hard work, dedication, and selflessness. She was always the first one in the gym and the last one to leave. She led by example, showing her teammates what it meant to be a true professional. Sophie pushed her teammates to be their best, both on and off the court. The Fever were a young team, eager to learn and grow, and in Sophie they had the perfect role model. She showed them the importance of teamwork, communication, and trust. Sophie was building something special in Indiana. She was building a culture of winning. Clark's enforcer, Cunningham's toughness shines through. Caitlin Clark, the Fever's star point guard, needed someone to watch her back, someone who wouldn't back down from a challenge, someone who would stand up for their teammates. Enter Sophie Cunningham. Sophie wasn't afraid of anyone. She played with a certain edge, a toughness that couldn't be taught. Opponents knew that if they messed with Caitlin, they'd have to answer to Sophie. She was Caitlin's protector on the court. Sophie's toughness was infectious. It rubbed off on her teammates. They knew they could always count on her to have their backs. She brought a certain swagger to the Fever, a confidence that had been missing. Sophie Cunningham wasn't just a talented basketball player. She was a force to be reckoned with, and with her by Caitlin's side, the Fever had a dynamic duo that was ready to take on the league. A perfect fit Cunningham's versatility on offense. Sophie Cunningham wasn't just a shooter. She was a complete basketball player. She could score at all three levels. She could handle the ball. She could find her teammates. And she fit perfectly into the Fever's up-tempo offense. Indiana wanted to play fast. They wanted to push the pace. They wanted to score in transition. And Sophie's versatility made her a perfect fit for their system. She could space the floor with her shooting. She could attack closeouts and get to the rim. Sophie's basketball IQ was off the charts. She always seemed to make the right play. The smart play, whether it was finding the open teammate, taking the open shot, or driving to the basket. Sophie Cunningham wasn't just a one-dimensional player. She was a Swiss Army knife on offense. She could do it all. And that versatility made her a nightmare for opposing defenses. Three-point threat. Cunningham's shooting prowess. Sophie Cunningham could shoot the lights out. She was a pure shooter, a deadeye from beyond the arc. Defenses knew she was a threat from the moment she crossed half-court. They couldn't leave her open, not even for a second. In her first season with the Fever, Sophie shot over 40% from three-point range. She was a walking bucket from deep, and her shooting ability opened up the floor for her teammates. It created driving lanes for Caitlin Clark. It gave her post players more room to operate inside. Sophie's shooting wasn't just about putting up big numbers. It was about making the right play. She didn't force shots. She took what the defense gave her, and more often than not, that meant knocking down open threes. Sophie Cunningham was a game-changer with her shooting ability. She could single-handedly swing the momentum of a game with a few flicks of her wrist. And that shooting prowess made her one of the most dangerous offensive players in the league. Veteran presence, leadership, and playoff experience. Sophie Cunningham wasn't just a talented young player. She was a leader. She had been to the playoffs before. She knew what it took to win at the highest level, and she brought that experience and leadership to a young Indiana Fever team. Sophie's leadership wasn't about yelling or screaming. It was about setting an example. It was about being a professional. It was about being there for her teammates, both on and off the court. Sophie had a calming presence on the court. She didn't get rattled easily. She played with a certain poise and confidence that rubbed off on her teammates. Sophie Cunningham was a natural leader. She led by example, she led with her voice, and she led with her heart. And that leadership was invaluable to a young Fever team that was still learning how to win. A team on the rise, debunking the doubters. Cheryl Swoops had her doubts about the Indiana Fever. She didn't think they were ready to compete. She didn't think they had the pieces. But Sophie Cunningham and the Fever were on a mission to prove her wrong. The Fever were a team on the rise. They were young, hungry, and talented. And with Sophie's arrival, they added a missing piece to the puzzle. They had a star point guard in Caitlin Clark. They had a strong supporting cast. And they had a leader in Sophie Cunningham. The Fever were playing with a chip on their shoulder. They heard the doubters, they saw the disrespect, and they were using it as motivation. They were out to prove that they belonged. They were out to show the league that the Indiana Fever were back. Sophie Cunningham didn't come to Indiana to lose. She came to win. She came to build a championship contender. And with each passing game, the Fever were proving that they were a force to be reckoned with. The future is bright. Cunningham's impact on the Fever. Sophie Cunningham's impact on the Indiana Fever went far beyond the stat sheet. She brought a winning mentality. She brought leadership. She brought toughness. And she brought a belief that this team could achieve something special. The Fever were no longer a team content with just making the playoffs. They had their sights set on a championship. And with Sophie Cunningham leading the way, anything felt possible. Sophie embraced the city of Indianapolis. She embraced her teammates. She embraced the challenge of building something special. And the city of Indianapolis embraced her right back. Sophie Cunningham had found a home in Indiana, and the future of the Indiana Fever had never looked brighter. Cheryl Swoops might have had her doubts, but Sophie Cunningham and the Fever were ready to prove the doubters wrong. The Fever were here to stay, and they were ready to make some noise.